And I'm delighted to see you, Dr. Kissinger, on the screen. And for me, it's a very moving moment because actually I met Dr. Kissinger the first time exactly 50 years ago at Harvard. Dr. Kissinger, you have been back a number of years here in Davos. I remember also our discussion, and many participants reminded me also today of the discussion we had 4 years ago on this stage. Thank you so much for making yourself available to discuss with the audience here in Davos, with which you are quite familiar, to discuss with you on the day, on a historical day, for the United States and for the world, to discuss with us the state of the world. And Dr. Kissinger, I just mentioned it's a historical date, but many participants here in Davos felt that the speech of President Xi Jinping in his own way was also historical. I know you read the speech, and I would like to ask you, what do you draw as a conclusion from the speech of President Xi Jinping?
May I make one brief comment about the previous part of your program? I knew Shimon Peres for 60 years, and he was an inspiration in many crises. And his significant contribution was that no matter how difficult problems were, he always was looking not for a definition of the problem so much as for a faith in a solution. And so it is an honor for me to be able to make this comment. Now, about your question. I think that President Xi's speech was of fundamental significance. It laid out a concept for globalization and some specific challenges and roads to a solution. But to me, the most important aspect was that it was an assertion by China of participating in the construction of an international order. One of the key problems of our period is that the international order with which we were familiar is disintegrating in some respects, and that new elements from Asia and the developing world are entering it. What President Xi has done is to put forward a concept of international order in the economic field that will have to be the subject of conversation and the substance of the creation of an evolving system.
Dr. Kissinger, 4 years ago when we had our discussion here, it was just at the inauguration of the second mandate of President Obama. And I asked you at that time, what advice would you give to President Obama for his second mandate? Now, I ask you the same question again. Of course, the president is now the 58th president of the United States, is now changed. And we all look forward to, and that was very much a discussion subject here, what can we expect from the presidency of a President Trump over the next 4 years? But what advice would you give to President Trump now?
Well, I would say to President Trump that one of the major achievements or impacts of President Obama was to withdraw America from some positions in which it was overextended, but also to create the fear that America was withdrawing from the world, even from places in which overextension would not apply and in which its contribution remains essential. So President Trump will have to find a definition of the American role that answers the concern of many parts of the world that America was giving up its indispensable role of leadership in some categories and major contribution in others, and to define where America can lead, where it must contribute, and in that process help on the creation of an international order.
Dr. Kissinger, imagine you would serve again as the National Security Advisor, and President Trump would call you into the Oval Office and would ask your advice. How now, after all the discussions who have taken place over the last weeks related to the issue, what would be your advice to structure his relationship with Russia? How do you see the Russian, or how would you like to see the Russian-US relationship evolving?
The relationship right now is at a point in which both sides seem to be operating on the basis of the worst assumptions they can make about the other side. In America, there is a strong resentment about the hacking, and there is sort of a general belief that Russia has been attempting to exploit weaknesses in the international system in order to enhance its own position. In Russia, there is the belief that the United States has systematically expanded its security belt in order to bring pressure on Russia, necessitating on Russia's part an assertion of its indispensability and of its capacity to react. President Trump has indicated that he would favor a less confrontational and more political approach. I agree with the general attitude. I think Russia is a country of a very special history, of 11 time zones touching Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Its impact on all these areas is considerable. It has been the cause of many tensions, but it has also secured the equilibrium of the world in the face of challenges from Asia, from various countries in Europe. And so I hope that an effort will be made for a serious dialogue which tries to avoid the drift towards confrontation, and in which Europe, America, and Russia come to some agreement about the limits within which military pressure is carried out. And so that is what I think one of the major tasks of the new administration.
Dr. Kissinger, we discussed also here during this week quite substantially the Middle East situation. And here, of course, the situation in Syria. We all know how much you were also involved, and you have your own ideas about what's happening. But I would ask you, what specific conditions you feel must be met to finally secure peace and stability in the Middle East region? Is it still even not a realistic objective, or should we have all the reasons to give up hope? And I should also add, what would you recommend to the new president to do to advance peace in the Middle East?
Well, Klaus, you're making any position in Washington for me very difficult to maintain by forcing me into these recommendations. My view is that when we talk about international order, there are various components that have already a structure, and they are acting on interaction with each other. The Middle East is a component in which the international order, as it was known, has disintegrated. The states that formed the international system in the Middle East are themselves, several of them, dissolving, as we are seeing to some extent in Syria and in Libya and even in Iraq. So first is the impact of the various elements in the Middle East on each other. There are a series of revolutions that are going on simultaneously and that are not always concurrent. There is the upheaval against established states. There is the religious conflict between Shia and Sunni and other religious groups. There is the impact of outside countries on the situation. So the first task that has to be undertaken is to attempt to calm the existing crises, of which Syria at the moment is the most notable. And it needs to have the following elements. It needs to have a ceasefire, which to some extent exists among the various parties. It needs to have a withdrawal of outside forces. It needs to have a definition of political units within the region that accept the status quo that will be defined in negotiations in Kazakhstan, which are projected or elsewhere. This is the first requirement. The second requirement is to prevent the region from being dominated by one of the parties that is capable or thinks that it's capable of achieving military dominance. And in that respect, some agreement between Russia, the United States, and Europe in some form would be extremely important. I do not think it is possible to achieve universal peace in one negotiation. The first step that has to be taken is to restore an equilibrium and to have it guaranteed by countries that are willing to act concurrently and for the same objective.